Nau mai hoki mai, ki tēnei wānanga ki Ngāpuhi Speaks, Part 2. A brief introduction from me, Ingrid Huygens, and then we'll return to Te Mahurehure Marae. So Part 2 of the Ngāpuhi Speaks webinar builds on the insights and educational messages drawn out by JJ Carberry and Susan Healy in Part 1. And in Part 2, the learning activity we show responds to the issues they raise about seeing New Zealand's history only through Pākehā eyes, and about tauiwi in particular being ignorant or disparaging about the steps taken by Māori tupuna as they interacted with our Pākehā ancestors. In this activity about Te Wakaminenga, we express much of the evidence given at the hearings. And it's a narrated role play, and it can be recreated in any educational setting to cover the time period from the early 1800s, when Te Wakaminenga first began meeting, through to 1835, when He Whakaputanga, the declaration, was made. And it aims to embody the mana of rangatira of that time, to express the authority, the responsibility, and the foresight with which they acted. It aims to put in front of our eyes ngā kānohi o ēnei rangatira, the faces of these leaders, so that we can recognise the actual people who shaped this country's history. In all their faces, in every region where the rangatira were meeting to discuss the interaction with the newcomers, we need to become familiar with their faces so that they are as known to us as the British faces that we still mostly see in our history lessons. It aims to dispel the truly damaging myths that are the legacy of our colonial society. And through these visual, physical, and intellectual aspects, it aims to help tauiwi feel and move towards the respectful relationships these rangatira Māori intended for this country. To give you some context, hapu leaders had always gathered in council throughout Māori life here. Indeed, there is a whakatauki i te ao Māori, he aha te kai a te rangatira. What is the food of a leader? And it is a trick question. He kōrero, he kōrero, he kōrero. The food of a leader is talk, discussion, sharing of knowledge. The places where rangatira met throughout the country were known in many places as te tō o ngā rangatira, meaning the seat of leaders. And as Grey Theodore explains here from the hearings, te tō o ngā rangatira played a huge role in the decision-making of our ancestors prior to European occupation in the Bay of Islands. And the tō rangatira that you see here is the particular one at Waitangi, lying next to Te Ti Marae. So now let's continue at the marae, where the leaders are already seated.
So that tradition led to these gatherings, and from 1808 they came to be known as Te Wakaminenga. Mine means assemble, so the United Tribes Assembly. So as early as 1808, our tupuna, says Hori Parata, began to meet to discuss issues associated with the hapu hou. And they'd bring issues to this gathering like occupation laws, trading laws, peace and good order, how to develop tikanga to cover those new situations. And for each rangatira that came to these gatherings, they were there to do the work of a unified voice on those issues. The gathering did not in any way detract from the mana of that hapu when they were dealing with their own issues. So it was, as Moana Jackson again has said, it was a new form of mana, a new marae that emerged constitutionally within the Māori world. So it's incredibly important for tauiwi to understand that, because a lot of Pākehā will say instantly, oh, well then did it tell hapu what to do? No, it didn't. It was the agreements on these new issues. So when the rangatira met, they pledged their hapu to be part of the Wakaminenga, the General Assembly. So it was likened to a United Nations in its structure. So this is a role play that shows how the Māori leaders organised for the future, how New Zealand secured a national flag, and then how He Whakaputanga was proclaimed. And what most people find in their education settings, just as JJ said, is once this whole process is understood, you can do the treaty in 5 minutes. You hardly need any time at all on the treaty. It's so obvious. So let's do it. Okay, so these gatherings began, and I've invited these beautiful rangatira, you're already rangatira, to the stage, and they're already seated to show that these gatherings were already traditional. But the first rangatira that began this actual assembly is called Te Pahi. Now, Te Pahi was a thoughtful man. So let me just, yes, okay, here we are. You can see the hairstyles. Excellent. And Te Pahi was the rangatira of the Bay of Islands, whose people had the French here with Captain Dufresne and the fishing crew that wouldn't follow tapu. He'd had, it was again some of his young men that were being taken by sea captains and not brought back or being abandoned. So he was very aware of the issues that were occurring because Pākehā were not obeying Māori law or Māori tikanga. So he resolved that he needed to go and visit the governor in Sydney, because he thought, right, we need to speak to their rangatira. So in 1805, he made the journey with his sons, stayed in the governor's house, and had many conversations with the governor. You were a man of a legal mind, Te Pahi, so you had many conversations with him about justice, and said to him, you're the ambassador for these people, you need to control your sea captains who come to my country. And Governor King said to him, I'm sorry, Te Pahi, I can't, because I don't even know who's coming to your country. So Te Pahi, you thought to yourself, okay then, we are going to have to do this ourselves. So Te Pahi, you came home and you began to call these gatherings, beginning from that period, 1806, 1807, and so on. So 1808 is acknowledged as the date. So kia ora Te Pahi, it's your legal sharp mind that started this off. So now let's think, who's probably the most important military general of the Ngāpuhi world of that time, who you definitely would have had in his gathering? Have a guess? Recognise the moko? Hongi Hika. Kia ora Hongi. This is highly appropriate. Our Race Relations Commissioner is Hongi Hika. Kia ora Hongi. So Hongi, you were not just a man of military leadership. You also were someone who thought a lot about power and authority and where it should lie. You thought to yourself, why did we bother with the governor in Sydney? He's just the servant of the Queen. We should go to the rangatira of the English. So Hongi, you resolve in 1820, so this gathering's been going for 12 years by now, you resolve, I will visit the monarchy in Britain. But you're not a star, you're not going alone, you are very aware of your accountability to your fellow colleagues here. So you take with you the secretary of this gathering. So, kia ora moe.
Kia ora.
Your name is Waikato. So you are also a Bay of Islands rangatira, and you are acknowledged as the taiapuru, as the secretary of the Wakaminenga. So I think you just remind them of the decisions they made last time. So you go with Hongi to London in 1820, and you have audiences with King George IV there. Now you are stars when you get to London. They love you The paparazzi follow you around. They paint pictures of you. Here you are. Gorgeous oil painting. You're wearing your kiwi cloaks. Sometimes you wear them. Other times you wear your velvet jackets and your silk cravats. And the media comment on your knowledge of world affairs, your sophistication in politics and diplomacy and philosophy and so on. So they're most impressed by you. You do have your audience with King George, Hongi, and you say to him, I want you to promise free trade with our country. Now George says, we'd be delighted. He's delighted that Britain has the chance to have a preferential trade partnership with this basket of abundance at the end of the South Pacific. So he's delighted to have a formal relationship with you. Hongi, you say in reply to that, you say, thank you. In response to that, I promise to let your people live in my country in peace. Ngāpuhi call that Hongi's great promise that Hongi made to Hori, King George. It's why many children in the Māori world are called Hori, Kingi, Kingi Hori. It's in respect of the relationship set up by Hongi Hika and King George, Hori Kingi. So 1820 is when that relationship with the British royal family began at that level. And iwi throughout the country acknowledged that Hongi Hika led that for Māori, basically. So kia ora, Hongi. Beautiful diplomacy, beautiful Waikato. Now, you were bilingual, so you were the one doing the interpreting during this. And just a little extra piece of information, the two of you went to Professor Samuel Lee at Cambridge, because the missionary with you, Kendall, took you there, and you, with Professor Lee of Cambridge, decided on the orthography of Māori language, so how to match the alphabet to the sounds. And there's never been any arguments about it since. So, kia ora Hongi, kia ora Waikato. Now, while all this high-level diplomacy was going on, the trade is continuing in New Zealand, and particularly in the Hokianga, so kia ora, you are doing shipbuilding. You know, the rangatira there own all the kauri. You start the first shipbuilding yards in the country at Horeke, at the very tip of a estuary of the Hokianga. And you have built a beautiful new ship. So your names are Patuone and Taonui. So Patuone, kia ora. Kia ora. Kia ora. So you're a very erudite man. In fact, Patuone, your life was so long that when you were 5 years old, you saw Captain Cook arrive. Yeah. Yes. So by now you live over on the Hokianga side, and together with Taonui here, so kia ora Taonui, both of you, Tony, you're a bit of an engineer. You can recognise the girth of a mast at 20 metres. No one can cheat you on the value of your kauri. And you own it all in the tip of the Hokianga. You've built a beautiful new ship in your shipyard called the Sir George Murray. You've sent it to Sydney. We're in 1831 now. And exactly as JJ said, that ship was confiscated by the harbour master in Sydney, who took it into his head that day to say, you're not flying a flag that I recognise. Now, many accounts say that these two rangatira were on board, that you two ran up a whāriki, or maybe a paki, to show you were Māori shipping, Polynesian shipping, but to no avail. The harbour master confiscated the ship. Now, I want to ask you two, what do you think of that? Just look at their expressions, having your ship. Not happy, indeed. And you march yourselves up to the governor's house, who you know through Te Pahi, and say, we'll be back for dinner, and we need to discuss this. And that's exactly what happened. These two rangatira begin the discussions with the governor in Sydney, back home with Busby is here by now, the Williams, the missionary was a sea captain. So the discussions begin with their advisors about a flag to denote New Zealand shipping. So Taonui, I want you to take charge of the flag. Kia ora. So the decision was made by 1834 by this group. As we know, they selected from a number of choices, they selected this flag, first national flag of this country. And that flag was then sent back to, by then, the brother of King George, to King William, who wrote a very formal letter through the Colonial Office saying, yes, we have gazetted your flag, we've sent it off to the other navies in the world. So the colonial navies of the world recognised New Zealand as a nation. And a criteria for being a nation in international law is to have a flag that other countries recognise. It's a political criteria. So kia ora, Taonui and Patuone. Right. Now, this flag being recognised in 1834, now this had the interest of the other rangatira of the north began to take notice. Remember the wars between Ngāpuhi and Waikato and Te Arawa and so on were over by now. We're up to 1834. So we have the, by then a very leading rangatira of Waikato beginning to travel to the north. So kia ora, te whirowhiro, your hair matches beautifully, Heather.
Oh, kia ora, kia ora.
Te whirowhiro begins to travel to the north. And he, and this, those of you who know your kingitanga history, he was very interested in the rangatira who were in the United Tribes Assembly and those who chose not to be. And in Ngāpuhi Speaks, we show the evidence that he visited those who felt there was no need to be in an assembly. I will remain the rangatira of my region and we will control it the way we always have. So, te whirowhiro, you heard from all your colleagues and eventually you thought, I will be part of this. I want to be part of this. So kia ora to you. I think at that time where te whirowhiro went, the young te hiuhiu ariki went. So kia ora, tūwhare toa, your iwiko te hiuhiu. So that's the younger brother of Mananui. He was the one moving around. Mananui stayed at home. So kia ora iwiko, you also were making trips to the north and with these people. All these names, people, are ones you can see both in the declaration and some in the treaty. And it's interesting which ones are in either. Oh, kia ora, te haukainga, tēnā koe. So, Kahungunu were also taking notice. So you think about that big Wairarapa coastline, it's very easy to sail from there up to the north. So, te hapuku, kia ora, te hapuku no o Kahungunu. So you were joining your colleagues in the north and were most interested. You had whalers in your area. When you lived at Mahia, you used to boss the whalers around, and you were quite clear you wanted to settle a better class of Pākehā in your area than the whalers you knew rather too well. So you wanted to discuss that with your colleagues. So you can see it wasn't just trading law or even peace, it was settlement law, how to develop tikanga for settlement and choosing settlers. So kia ora te hapuku for your vision there. Ooh, and now we come to, it wasn't just the Te Ika Maui area, it was also Te Waipounamu, Te Waka a Maui. The southern tribes had been sending their own rangatira over to Sydney to talk with the governor, just like Te Pahi, and been saying, what can we do to control your people, your sealers and whalers when they're in my area? And so although you didn't attend as far as we know, you had many, many links, marriage links and so on, but you definitely supported and shared information. So, kia ora, tū Hawaiki. We don't have a photo of you, we have your moko. So tū Hawaiki defended that whole area from Kaiapoi down to the Invercargill area. And so here we see seated the whole group of those who were in the Wakaminenga o ngā hapu o Nutireni. So actually, by about now, so by about the time that these ones from around the country were feeding in and gathering information, Busby was part of the scene. So kia ora Busby, we'll show him as someone here, a bit of a Johnny come lately. Kia ora. So maybe we'll give you a seat. Now Busby, think about it, he was a Scotsman. So he knew that where the clan leaders meet, that is the Scottish Parliament. So he understood what he was looking at. He understood they didn't always meet where he could see them. They met in different places. But wherever they met, that was their parliament. So kia ora, Busby, you were very supportive of this group and very delighted about it, actually, because you could see that that was a way for the world of the hapu to have a voice into the international constitutional realm. So kia ora, Busby. But we also have to acknowledge that Busby in his writings, exactly as Susan said, oh, and then they stopped meeting. But what Busby didn't know, I'll block his ears, he didn't know that they hadn't invited him. They didn't always invite him. That's the point. So we need to really remember that with all our colonial writers. They weren't always present when the big decisions were being made. They didn't always know the reasons behind something. They didn't always know who was allied to who and which relationship was going to matter. So that's very important, and it helps to have Busby a little bit hovering here. But the one thing that they did acknowledge with Busby, and then later with Hobson, so I'm going to give you Hobson's picture as well, they just saw this as, well, this is great that you're sitting here with us, Busby. Come and sit as one with us to discuss the future of our country. That's how they saw the Pākehā, is they needed their own leader to be part of these gatherings so that the country could go forward together constitutionally. And this is a personal view of mine, but it's very much following the train of thought of what we heard from Ngāpuhi, that if this constitutional arrangement had continued, or still might continue, the rangatira might have said once your people arrived, now we need a Chinese governor. When the Indian people started to come from the Punjab in great numbers, actually we'll have an Indian governor too. Come and sit as one with us. So this is the potential of this constitutional arrangement, is that it does allow each group that needs to be sitting here because they have their own tikanga, they could be invited to sit as one with the rangatira. So kia ora everyone. Now, Busby, we'll take it a step further now, Busby now advised this group, it was his advice, he said, you have a flag, taonui, kia ora. You have a flag. What the international world needs is a document that sits under that flag, that actually expresses in writing your mana in this country. So you as a group begin to write that document. So I'm going to invite you and the audience at home to just think for a minute, you know enough, what would you write in your document, which is going to be the declaration, the Whakaputanga? What would you write? Just turn to the person next to you. What would you write in your document? Kia ora koutou. So let's hear from you. What would you say in your declaration to the world? Ooh, Busby and Tuha Waiki have been discussing this here. We'll pass that. Off you go.
Well, my people from Te Waipounamu, we're speaking with Busby here, and we thought it was most paramount that we protect the sovereignty of our future generations.
Cool.
That's what we... Is that where we came to, Busby? Yeah.
Paitira.
And Busby being a manuhiri to this whenua needs to be respectful of the people here and be guided by themselves.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
We talked about to show that we are united in Aotearoa.
Kia ora. Hai.
And that all the different iwi and hapu have their own tikanga respected, their kawa respected, and each of them.
Kia ora. So you're united in your diversity. You still have your mana at home. Kia ora.
So we talked about the two te rangatira, kei te rangatira, te two mana mo te katoa, and that everybody else who came in under that rangatira status.
Kuia.
And their mana.
Kuia. Yeah. We are the rangatira. It's our law here. Aye.
Yeah, we've spoken about the kindness of the document that allowed us to settle here. You didn't say, go home. You said, come here but be respectful.
Yes.
Yeah, so we say, acknowledge the kindness.
Yes. And Meng, you've jumped ahead to the treaty, actually. Aye. But the treaty sits beautifully under this document, so we'll get to the treaty, yes. Yeah, as a manuhiri you were jumping there, yeah. Anything from Te Pahi? You're the man who started this, who understood it was necessary.
I think that that's what some things were a given.
Yes.
Because there was a need to talk to an international space, those things had to be written in so you could create independence.
Yes.
I feel
Yeah, kia ora. Kia ora koutou. Speaking as a rangatira. And that's exactly what they did say, those things. I'll just, if you want to turn, I'll show you what the document itself looked like. This is so we should acknowledge Waikato, although in fact by then it was Hongi Hika's nephew, Eruera Parehongi, was the writer of this document. So many people comment that when they see this Whakaputanga, the beauty of the writing, and it was very well kept in the English archives for a long time. And they also notice, well, first they notice it's in Te Reo Māori. Secondly, that there are there's an underlined phrase, and that is ko te Wakaminenga o ngā hapu o Tiriti, meaning we are the authors of this document. So it's very clear. We'll go back to the articles in a moment. I just want to show you your own signatures. So this is the first time in a document for the world that ngā rangatira Māori use the aspects of their moko for their signatures. And particularly, it was explained by Eri Mahenare, they used the moko of the ngu near the nose to show many things, the importance, the mana of their agreement, the hongi involved, and so on. So it was a very important choice to make, to use an aspect of your moko. And here we have some of the signatories that you can see here. We've got Patuone, we've got Taonui way down here, we've got Hapuku, we've got Te Whero. And if you notice the dates, Te Whero didn't sign until 1839. And I want to just kind of hint ahead about what's happening here. Te Whero, you said to your colleagues, I agree with everything that's happening here. I agree with it. But I will go home to my own people to sign. And that's very correct in the Māori world. I will go home to my own people to sign. And he did exactly that. He went to that area around Ihumātao, is the thinking that that's where he went, because that was the border of Waikato there. So kia ora Te Whero.
Kia ora.
And it's interesting, again, with staying with Te Whero, and we'll look at the word kingitanga in a moment. When the treaty was given to Te Whero to look at, this is what's passed down through Tainui, he looked at it and he said, I don't need to sign this because the declaration says everything that I want to say. So understanding this allows us to understand that the treaty made that concession of Pākehā will be allowed to buy land. It's one of the main concessions in the Treaty of Waitangi. And Te Whero was quite clear that the Waikato land would not be sold. So you can see it's so easy to understand the two when you see them together. Just to look briefly at the clauses, we'll just go, we can see the Te Reo Māori there, we can see the Te Reo Pākehā on the other side. It's a very clear statement. Ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira, we, the absolute rangatira. We declare the sovereign authority of our land, te rangatiratanga o tō mātou whenua. So for those who are studying the treaty, just as JJ said, if you understand that the words rangatiratanga and later kāwanatanga first appeared here, that gets rid of all that colonial discourse of Māori didn't know what they were signing, Māori didn't understand the words. So I won't take you through each one, but you can see the phrase ko te kingitanga, ko te mana is first used here. And it's therefore interesting that that was exactly what was chosen as the name for the kingitanga movement. And it's very, very clear in this declaration that kāwanatanga is a delegated authority, delegated by this group for you, Mr. Hobson now, Busby or Hobson, that if what they're doing here in the declaration is they're foreshadowing, if we were to permit any others to frame laws or perform governments, that would be as appointed by us. So that's the foreshadowing that happens in this document. And again, it deepens our understanding of how to explain the treaty. So only those appointed by us within our laws. So here it is in simple form. And there is the dates. And as Susan said, the Hauraki Rangatira, who, as some of you will know, were very strong in standing upon their mana and their right to continue to apply tikanga in their region. And when the moment came that they saw after 50 years, how much the treaty had been dishonoured in 1890, they asked for this. They asked for the declaration to sign it. And then even later again in 1916, Tūhoe passed an act that showed that they supported the Whakaputanga. So it is a live document. And I think that's very important for us to understand that. So we're going to close this activity by just asking, first of all, the audience, I'd like you to reflect what you see as you look at this group. Just gaze upon them, everyone. What do you see when you see this group? And I'm hoping you're saying things like, you see power, you see mana, you see a united voice, you see respect for each other's diversity and mana in their own regions and so on. It's very worth reflecting on. I'm going to ask the rangatira themselves. Sometimes it feels different sitting in this position. What does it feel like for you to be sitting here?
It feels powerful from this spot. It feels powerful, but I'm not sure what that one on the end is doing here.
Kia ora te Pahi.
Feels like a responsibility.
Yes. Kia ora te Pahi. That's exactly the feeling, isn't it? The responsibility of leading the country forward. Kia ora. Kia ora, Hongi. Aye. Yeah, the honour of it. The honour of it. Yeah. Kia ora.
I'm actually getting really thoughtful because I'm just a little bit disappointed that the only woman in the story happens to be the secretary. And I do know that there were in the north many Wahine relatives who signed the treaty as well.
Yes.
So there's that. And the other thing, Māori Marsden, one of Māori Marsden's quotes is, fish don't know that they swim in water. And the whole act of rangatira was just an ordinary part of our existence, or our Tribunal's existence. So decisions made by them were made from their mātauranga Māori, which actually governed their existence. So, yeah, so I'm just kind of reflecting on, I don't tell backstories very often, if the only stories we're going to tell is of Waikato being a secretary, because I'm sure she had a far greater role as well.
Kia ora. And absolutely, because the signatories haven't, it hasn't been traced back, and there were definitely women rangatira who sat in Te Wakaminenga. Absolutely. And I love your thought of what else would a rangatira be doing? This is what we do. This is what we do. Kia ora. Kia ora.
I felt thoughtful too, and I started to learn something quite significant from my discussions with the rangatira beside me, and making me just realising that in those conversations, meeting like this, you learn a lot from each other.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Just been thinking about the sense of collective responsibility rather than individual.
Yes. Kia ora.
I was thinking of how I represent
Who you
a lot of people who are Ngāpuhi behind me, but also being that collective, how meeting like this makes us stronger as New Zealand Aotearoa.
Whakamana. Kia ora.
It strikes me that this is very pragmatic. So this Wakaminenga is also an expression of a pragmatism and an adaptability to a changing time. And so it's looking at the change and going, okay, let's make some informed decisions about how we're going to work with the change. And so a great pragmatism and leadership.
Well, kia ora mai tātou. These two gentlemen here are Ngā Tupuna like everybody else, and actually did contribute to a very large comment to Tātuka. So I do want to honour the gentlemen because the Hobsons and the Puhipis and the whānau are very close. And I would imagine that there are stories, other stories, that live within their generations of whānau that perhaps tell another story.
Kia ora. We're very happy with everyone's involvement in this and the demonstration that it gives. And in particular, for Susan and I, it follows JJ's impassioned message to us that doing this, looking through Ngāpuhi Speaks, understanding the messages of that, of those Ngāpuhi speakers, it dissolves the myths. And those myths drench the minds not only of tauiwi, but also of tangata whenua. And for Susan and I, the deep outcome for us has been that understanding the kōrero of Ngāpuhi restores the faith of young Maori in their own tupuna and their own rangatira and the forward-looking leadership that was coming from them in that time, as well as breaking the myths in the Pākehā mind that have come through from our colonial mindset. So it's the myth-breaking aspect that has been so important for treaty education. Kia ora koutou.
Just many to our wahine toa, to our horo Healy, who's been part of this kaupapa for a number of years. For those of the whānau that are online, we want to apologise for any of the technical challenges. But let me tell you, if you're Te Tātou, if you're Ngāpuhi, you need to get Ngāpuhi Speaks for your household.
Kia ora.
So,